Last week when I was exercising on the treadmill, I was using my iPod to listen to a sermon that was talking about how our words can trap us and lock us in to negative emotions. Well, as I was listening, God started to speak to me. And there I was running on the treadmill, and God started to speak to me very specifically about my own negative thinking pattern. And so he said, have a look through your thoughts, Grant, and see where you're thinking negatively. So I was quickly able to pick out spots where I had problems with fear or anger or bitterness or discouragement, those kinds of things. Then God said, when did those thought patterns start? What was the event that triggered it? Well, it was very easy to come up with that because these are all events that happened in my adult life, not in my dark, deep childhood memories. So it was very easy to say, oh yeah, I remember that happened and I've been upset about it ever since. And whenever that thought comes back, I can feel it. So then God said, look at that event. What did you believe about that event that has kept you upset ever since? Well, then the lights went on. I realized that at the time of the event, I believed a lie that Satan planted in my mind that has kept me upset about it ever since. This is what I teach in my seminars. When events happen in our life that are unpleasant, Satan tries to trap us to believe his lies to keep us upset. And then God said, what do you call repetitive thought patterns that are based on lies? Well, a stronghold. Well, this was really embarrassing because I, of course, teach on strongholds. And I just did a blog on strongholds a couple of weeks ago. And I teach people how to recognize and get rid of strongholds. And here God pointed out that I still had them. Well, it was a little awkward, but it was also a point of freedom because God gave me a much clearer understanding now about strongholds, how subtle and deceptive and common they are, and how we can get out of them. So here's how it happens, because he showed me a much clearer way of understanding, and I really wanted to share it with you. So throughout the course of our lives, events happen. And every time something happens in your life, you draw a conclusion about that event. And your conclusions can either be positive or constructive, and that you could either feel good about the event or at least neutral, or your response and your conclusion can be destructive and negative. In other words, the event stirs you up and triggers either fear or bitterness, anger, discouragement, you name it. If it's negative, that would qualify. Well, Satan, of course, wants us to always be focused and suffering and experiencing negative emotions. He wants to torment us. So at the time of an event in your life, he wants to hook you and draw you into a negative thinking pattern, which he can use against you for the rest of your life. And he baits that hook with all kinds of justifications why you should feel afraid or discouraged or angry about what just happened. Then, as soon as you say, yeah, that's right, I'm justified in feeling angry or bitter or resentful or discouraged, then your bondage begins, and it looks like this. So as soon as you agree with that lie that Satan has planted, you empower it, and it has power over you. And so Satan continuously reminds you of that event so that every time that thought comes up, you feel that negativity come back, and you feel the anger or the fear or the discouragement comes back, and you get locked up. And this creates a stronghold. In other words, a safe place for Satan to torment you. Because every time you agree with that lie, you reinforce the place where he can shoot his arrows at you from. And so you get locked into repetitive negative thinking every time you think of that past event. So this is the state that far too many of us are in. So how do we break free? Well, what you do is have a look at your thinking patterns. Look at every thinking pattern you have that's negative. So that could be fear or anger or discouragement, you name it. If it's negative, it qualifies. Then ask God to show you, or you just may know right off the top of your head, what was the event that started that? When did this begin? And if you were like me, it would be in your adult life and be very easy to remember. Then ask God, what did you believe about that event that has kept you upset? And that is the key to the root of your stronghold. When you can put your finger on what you believed that has kept you upset ever since. But here is the key to your freedom. Now ask God, what is the conclusion that He wants you to make about that event, so that you no longer will be trapped into these recurrent negative emotions. And then you take that key through repenting for believing the lies of Satan, forgiving the people that offended you, or forgiving anyone who may have been responsible for the event, and then you use that key to set yourself free. And then as you give up that old thinking pattern and adopt the conclusions that God wants you to make, which are constructive, then you break the stronghold and Satan flees and you're set free. And then in the future, every time Satan tries to remind you of that event, to suck you back into the old thinking pattern, you'll just say, I used to think that way, but now I've taken the conclusions that God has showed me. So to live a transformed life, you need to be able to recognize your strongholds and destroy them using the keys of different conclusions that God will give you. Now I want to hear from you. How have you been able to recognize and destroy strongholds in your life? Just leave your comments in the box below. And if this is your first visit here, then you need to get my free self-assessment guide. And to do that, just subscribe to my weekly email newsletter by filling out the subscription form right there. So I'll talk to you again next week, but this week, ask God to reveal your strongholds.